Hey everybody, Tom again from the dugout. We did a short a little bit ago talking about bourbon, the ins and outs of bourbon, and I had mentioned that I have a very good friend who knows a lot about bourbon. He's here now, and we'll kind of like do a little, I guess, interview questions for him and see where it goes. But he's going to talk about the bourbon industry. We've had requests to do that, so we're going to do it. We're also drinking right now some Old Grandad to go along with the show. All right, let's start. This is Brendan.
Hello.
And I'm going to ask him some questions. And if anybody has questions after we're done, please comment, and we'll try to answer them as quickly as we can. So, Brendan, to start off, could you give us a little bit about the history of bourbon? Where did it start? How did it get there, and how has it come up to the present day?
Well, I mean, no one's exactly 100% sure where it got its name. Roughly mid 1800s, 1850 to 1870 or so is when bourbon got its name, bourbon. Some people say it comes from Bourbon County, Kentucky. Other people say because most of that whiskey made in Kentucky was shipped down the Mississippi to New Orleans, that it's named after Bourbon Street. There's debates on both sides of that, where, what it is. I mean, as it stands now, Bourbon County, Kentucky's, I think it's still a dry county, so they don't really do much.
I think
with
it
there.
is. I think it is.
But, that's just there's people on both sides that think it comes from one of those two places, but there's no settled argument. So I guess that's the.
So has the mash bills changed much over the years?
Well, mash bills go into like what rules are. So to be considered a bourbon, it has to be made from at least 51% corn. That has to be in your mash bill.
And
now
it's always been like that.
Well, call it bourbon.
Since they were shipping it down the Mississippi.
I feel like in the old days it was, like that was what was readily available to make whiskey with, and so that's what they made whiskey with. Okay. And that the stuff they made with corn ended up taking on the name bourbon.
Oh, okay.
Like it's just like there's American rye, there's American wheat whiskeys. Bourbon is essentially American corn whiskey, but that's not a cool name. You can't market that.
Yeah, that wouldn't sell as good as bourbon.
Right.
All right. How about what makes bourbon so special from, say, rye whiskey or brandy or scotch? What ingredients go in bourbon that makes it so special?
Well, I mean, the things that make it special, for one, it's one of two unique American spirits that are recognized by actually recognized by the government. So bourbon's like the American spirit. Tennessee whiskey is also one of those.
It's official.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's the official American spirit because it can only be made in the United States. Has to be, like we said, has to be made with at least 51% corn in the mash bill, which, if you don't know what a mash bill is, that's the different types of grain you use to make the mash, which is what you distill into spirits. It's with any spirit. You make a mash and you distill that. So 51% corn, typically they use rye and malted barley. Some people use wheat and malted barley. Some people use malted rye now as a new thing, so it varies, but the majority grain must be corn, and then has to be aged in new charred oak barrels. There is no specific time that it has to spend in those barrels, unless you want to designate it something like straight or bonded. Straight means at least 2 years, bonded is at least 4, and there's a whole other classification of rules for bonded whiskey. There's oh my god, I'm losing my train of thought here.
Well, it has to be 100 proof, doesn't it?
Well, the minimum for bottling is 80 proof. For bonded, it's 100.
100 proof for bonded, yeah. Okay, well,
I don't. No, there's other things. There's like it can't be distilled any more than 160 proof. It can't go in the barrel any more than 125.
and this is all government control,
Uh,
regulations.
these are the rules for bourbon. Like if you want to call it bourbon, I mean, if you want to make corn whiskey this in the style of bourbon and put it in a barrel above 125 proof, you just can't put bourbon on the label when you bottle it. It's probably going to taste real similar, but there's all kinds of rules for it, and there's even more with bonded. So
Okay. Going along here, I've heard from you and other people traveling around that bourbon is becoming very popular in other countries too. Uh, Specifically Japan. This is what I've heard. Can you comment on that?
I mean, it's been popular in Japan. I know we talked about Four Roses is a brand that was nearly ruined by the Seagram's company in America, but the whole time after Seagram's bought it and they were selling their rot gut bottom shelf well whiskey with the Four Roses label on it here, they were exporting the good bourbon to Japan. So basically during the 50s and 60s and 70s, Japan was getting all this great bourbon, and the United States was looking at Four Roses as garbage whiskey. And you got about 2-3 generations of people who still think it sucks.
So Japan has been into bourbon since the 50s and 60s.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Japan, just like they did with our electronics, they took our idea and they made it better and cheaper.
Okay, well, that answers that. What about like other countries besides Japan? Is it popular in South America? Is it popular in Germany? Or do you even know that?
I mean, I'm not 100% sure about the South American market. I know it's fairly popular in Europe. But American whiskeys in Europe in general are like kind of looked down upon. They're not refined enough, you know, like they're still big on Scotch in Europe
And Irish whiskey.
Irish whiskey, but even Irish whiskey is still considered like a low class whiskey. Like, you know, people with status are drinking Scotch or they're drinking something else. You know, actually, I think tequila is probably bigger in Europe right now than whiskey at all. So.
Okay, how about, now this is something that I'm sure we all run into. We go to a liquor store, we're looking on the shelf, and we see some bourbon that costs $250, and we see other bourbon that costs $30. Why are some so expensive and others not? What makes that differentiation?
I mean, in Ohio, so the price is regulated by the state. So if you're seeing that price in Ohio, it's because generally the marketing that they put into the product, the amount of time they spend aging it. So if it's an older bourbon, it's going to be more expensive typically, you know. The more time they have to keep it in the rick house, the more money that costs. You know, it's just like, I mean, it's just like anything else. The more time you spend on it, the more money you're gonna have to charge to make your money back.
Okay, question on that then. So what I'm hearing from you is it depends on the aging process?
A lot of it.
Like a 2-year will go...
A lot of it depends on marketing too, because if you have like, you know, like Pappy Van Winkle in the 80s, you could find that on any liquor store shelf for less than $20 a bottle, but now it's famous and it's pretty rare, and Buffalo Trace only releases the bottles once a year, so people go crazy for it, and they don't really charge that much for it. If you win the lottery to purchase the bottle in Ohio, I mean, you're not going to pay any more than $200. I think $250 for the oldest one. But if somebody buys that bottle for $250, they're going to turn around and sell it for $2,500 on the secondary market, and somebody's going to pay it.
And somebody will buy it.
Yeah. Like, for example, you know, last year I stood in line to get a bottle of Weller 12-year-old, and I paid $42.60 for it because we're in Ohio. A year before that, I was in Kentucky with you and saw that same bottle on a shelf for $475 because Kentucky doesn't have any regulation, and the sellers can charge whatever they think they can get.
It's the Wild West down there, yeah, you're right. There's no state regs.
So, I mean, there's a lot of different reasons why the price is what the price is. So.
Okay. So it doesn't necessarily mean the quality. It's just what controls it at the moment.
Well, the quality. I mean, there's only really four things that go into bourbon: the barrel, the water, the mash bill, and the yeast, and that's it. So you can't put flavorings in it. You know, can't do anything to it. Can't put any coloring in it. You can't doctor it in any way and still call it bourbon.
So it's a quick question. The coloring then, that coloring right there.
Yeah.
That comes from the aging process?
That comes from the char on the barrel.
In the barrel?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And then what makes, like Makers, is much darker than that? What, is it because of a different aging?
Well, it's a number of things. Like the char on the barrel, there's, I think, 4 levels, level 1 through 4, and 4 is the darkest one. So the more char there is, the more that charcoal color will come out.
Gotcha.
Sometimes like winemakers will toast barrels, they call it, where they don't even really char it. They just warm it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Well,
that makes sense. That makes sense. The level of char that they
Yeah.
put on it with the flaming.
Right.
All right. Let's see. Hang on a second. My eyes aren't as good as they used to be. Some people, like myself, like to drink bourbon on the rocks. Other people that I know drink it neat. Is that all up to the individual? Is drinking it on the rocks any better or worse than drinking it neat?
I mean, everyone's palate's different, so however anybody likes to drink it is how they should drink it. Quite frankly, I mean,
I agree with that. I've been asked that
if
question.
you like to drink it neat and somebody else likes to drink it on the rocks, I mean, sure, you can make fun of them if you want to, but it's ultimately you're not drinking it, so why do you
Exactly,
care?
but there's no accepted process to do it. In other words, if you go into a high-class bourbon establishment and you ask for it on the rocks, that's fine to do. Because I think a lot of new people to bourbon get kind of intimidated if they put ice in it.
I don't know. I mean,
I never did, but
I've never had a bartender give me any kind of, looks, I guess, or whatever
Okay.
about
As long as you're
drinking
paying
something
for it.
on the rocks.
as long as you're paying for it. Last question. Cocktails. I have heard that, I don't know many cocktails. I think I know maybe 2 that you can do with bourbon. Are there any, what cocktails do you know? I mean, we know bourbon and Coke, bourbon old fashioned. Are there any more that you can have with bourbon?
I mean, I don't recommend using bourbon in cocktails except for maybe an old fashioned, or if you want to mix it with something like that, like Coke or ginger ale or whatever. I mean, if you're doing that, you probably just don't like the taste of bourbon. So I don't know. It's bourbon takes over cocktails. If you try to make a Manhattan with bourbon, it's going to taste like bourbon. If you make a Manhattan with something like rye, you'll taste all the different flavors in the vermouth. It's a completely different experience with a very similar whiskey, but bourbon doesn't work in cocktails for me typically, unless they're real sweet, because corn is sugar, and sugar and sugar go together. But
I agree with you, because I've been drinking bourbon for many years, but I don't drink it with cocktails, never have. I drink it on the rocks. But a lot of lady friends that I know like to mix it. Usually bourbon and Coke, or an old fashioned. Well, that about winds up my specific questions that I wanted to ask you today. We've got some people in the audience. Are there any other questions that somebody would like to ask about bourbon before we wind up? Nothing?
it doesn't look like it.
Nothing. Okay. Well, I hope everybody found that interesting. I know I did. But every time I talk to you, I find it interesting, because if it's not bourbon, you're well versed in every other kind of liquor that a bar has also. All right. If you like what you saw today, everybody, and you want to comment, please do. Please share if you'd like to do that, and subscribe. Until we see you again, have a good day. Bye-bye.